Joining me now is Michael Eric Dyson, professor at Georgetown University, also author of more than 20 books. His latest is What Truth Sounds Like, Robert F. Kennedy, James Baldwin, and our unfinished conversation about race in America. Michael, it's always good to get your insights on things. And I want to let our viewers know that you're also a preacher. So what do you make of the Attorney General's interpretation of Romans 13 in the Bible?
He needs to go back to seminary. He's never been there, so he needs to begin. This is a vastly wrong-headed misinterpretation of the Bible. First of all, that same passage that he cited was used to justify, legitimate, and make valid slavery. We were told not to oppose the government because the government was for the establishment of slavery, and as a result of that, God ordained it. And if God made the law, then one had to defer to the law. So this misuse of Scripture is certainly something that conservatives have done over the last year to justify and legitimate an administration that before they would have been opposed to some of the same behavior. The atrocious behavior of the president in office, the atrocious misuse and misinterpretation of Scripture by Jeff Sessions, the refusal to acknowledge justice as the basis of any biblical ethic of concern for the other. I mean, why didn't he quote Joshua? Why didn't he quote Amos? Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So here is proof texting and cherry picking of a Scripture to justify an atrocious, and I think many would conclude unchristian value in looking at how one treats children. I guess Jesus would have been seen as an immigrant who would have been separated from his mother and father, Joseph and Mary, because he was trying to escape into Egypt. This is the kind of atrocious misinterpretation that Mr. Sessions leads us to.
You talk about the many, and I will tell you that echoing your sentiments, the head of the College of Cardinals in the Catholic Church, Franklin Graham, the Reverend, also the head of the United Methodist Church, to which, by the way, Jeff Sessions belongs. Do you expect any kind of a retraction?
No, I mean, this is not their style. Here I am in Los Angeles. I will be preaching at Holman United Methodist Church tomorrow in his denomination. And of course, James Lawson, one of the great architects of nonviolence, was the pastor there, and now Pastor Kevin Sauls. These people, these ministers, these Christians understand that it is necessary to place children, to place women and men, to place believers, to place vulnerable members of our society at the heart of a gospel. No retraction is forthcoming because the style of apology is not something that the president is given to, and Jeff Sessions so far has very little inclination to evince a different kind of behavior. When you have cardinals, when you have even Franklin Graham, whose own troubling interpretation of the Scriptures has led to some, I think, misplaced theological emphasis on on order over justice, when you have even men like that suggesting that what Mr. Sessions has done is wrong-headed, there is no indication that they have enough humility, another biblical virtue, to acknowledge their wrong and to admit that they must submit to an authority higher than the law, which is God. Martin Luther King Jr. broke the law. Martin Luther King Jr., when he was involved in the civil rights movement, said that there is a higher law than the law that men and women make. It is God's law. So Mr. Sessions evoking justification for obeying the law because God supports it misses the point that there's a higher moral law that must be acceded to, and that Mr. Sessions continues to misinform other Americans about, and certainly a wrong-headed theological approach to the interpretation of the Bible.
You know, you mentioned this Romans 13 having been used to justify slavery, and I want to add that it was also used in Germany during Nazi times to justify some of the actions there. Both of them absolutely horrific examples of the misuse of that Scripture. The administration, Michael, do you think it's basically using a draconian measure? They're trying to get Democrats to the table, and do you think there is a scenario in your mind under any circumstances in which Democrats say, we cannot watch this play out anymore, maybe we need to do some compromise, which I guess the only way you can compromise with this president is to fund his wall?
Yeah, well, first of all, how do you compromise with somebody who uses such draconian measures? The ability of this administration to, in one sense, deny the legitimacy of human life, to make sure in their own calculations of public policy or gestures in public that they will use children's bodies as the kind of capital to procure democratic investment or at least cooperation is extraordinary. It is not only draconian, some, since we're speaking theologically, would suggest it's even evil, a denial of the legitimate aspect of recognizing the other. Even in combat, people say that we must recognize civilians versus those who are combatants. So now we are taking innocent children, yes, children who through no fault of their own are caught in a situation to be punished by a president and a Justice Department that has failed, neglected, and refused to see that there's one thing to talk about public policy, another thing to make children innocent suffer for that value. Now, as to whether or not the Democrats will negotiate is still another story. They've evinced some capacity to do so, but this doesn't solve the ultimate problem of what we do with people meeting at the borders and how we treat them and how we turn them back.
You know, Michael, you mentioned innocent children suffering. What concerns me, and I suspect it does you as well, is the effect on these kids.
That's right.
Young children, I mean, I'm nearly in tears looking at pictures of children, little children crying in the dark as they're being separated from their parents. The long-term effect of this, are you as concerned as I am about that?
Absolutely. Post-traumatic stress, the deepening of their own vulnerabilities and insecurities, the belief that their country does not care for them. If they finally find lodging, if they find citizenship, if they find residence here, but just in their own bodies, carrying the memory, the cellular memory of their traumatic separation from their mothers and fathers. And think about that little child whose father committed suicide because he was separated from him. Oof. Think about the vulnerability and the psychic trauma that they will endure for the rest of their lives, inscribed into their very bodies. Shame on America, shame on Donald Trump, shame on Jeff Sessions, and shame on any of these Republicans who are complicitous in this behavior. Paul Ryan must step up and say more than "I disagree." Do something. Have a moral sensibility that allows you to articulate your concern as a human being beyond any kind of partisan politics. That's what's called upon for us today.
Michael, I want to get to your book before I'm able to let you go here. That you write about this 1963 meeting that was between Robert F. Kennedy and James Baldwin and a group of black thought leaders. And right. You say that it changed RFK's position on the civil rights of African Americans. Can you imagine a group of leaders today who can help this president come around on issues affecting people of color?
Well, the first thing is, even though Bobby Kennedy got very mad and angry at that meeting, he at least listened, and he evinced the possibility. He showed the maturity to evolve over space and time. I don't think this president will listen to anybody who can bring him any kind of understanding and insight. You can't appeal to entertainers and athletes who agree with you already, who are not challenging you. In order for this president to be challenged, sit down with Malcolm Jenkins, Michael Bennett, Serena Williams, Swin Cash. Sit down with people who are of high intelligence, John Legend, Jay-Z, Beyonce, to engage you in a serious conversation about what's going on. Don't just bring around your table people who agree. What Bobby Kennedy showed was the ability to listen to people that he didn't necessarily agree with, but that he learned from, and therefore transformed his outlook and behavior and made him, by the end of his life, the most trusted white man in America in the eyes of many black people in this country. That's the kind of fortitude, that's the kind of insight, and that's the kind of grace and dignity that a true statesman evinces in the face of opposition and odds. This president lacks any sense of decency, humanity, and respect for the other. So I don't think he'll be having that conversation soon, and certainly not one that could teach him some new lessons about race in America.
Some lessons to be learned, certainly, from your newest book, What Truth Sounds Like. Michael Eric Dyson, good to see you. Thank you, Michael.
Always great to see you.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.